Hello there, everybody. Me again. So I'm James Clack. As was mentioned, I'm the head of digital learning at Active IQ. So once again, on behalf of myself and the team at Active IQ, thanks for joining us this week for the Empowering the Workforce strand of Active Uprising 2020, which we're delighted to be sponsoring and supporting. So we hope you found all the webinars this week so far useful. I know I have. There's been lots of insight and useful guidance, information and thought leadership which has been shared. Obviously, yesterday we had Jeremy Snape looking at leadership after lockdown, and we have another great session for you today, as Chris mentioned, delivered by Kate Cooper. And this continues along the theme of leadership and looks specifically at coaching conversations, where Kate will provide you a step-by-step guide on how to use this approach to conversations wherever you are. And I'm sure this is going to benefit us all as we move into our sector reopening. So just one final bit from me is do remember, this isn't the end of the week. There's another session tomorrow, Friday, and that is the reality of COVID-19 and preparing the workforce. And if you haven't signed up for that yet, then please do so. You can do that via the UK Active event page on the website. So that's enough from me. Time to hand over to Kate and let her share all of her knowledge and insight. And just to say, hope you enjoyed the session. Speak to you all soon.
Thanks very much, James. Thanks very much, Chris. And thank you to everybody who's here today joining the conversation that I'm having essentially with myself about having a coaching conversation. And I really appreciate it when people talk to my years of experience because it makes me feel very old. Because as we know, you can have the same experience the same year after year and not learn anything. And I think what I've found is the more I find out things, the more I find I don't know, and the more there is to know. And none so more true about how to be a great coach, how to have a great coaching conversation. At the Leadership Institute of Leadership and Management, you'd expect us, wouldn't you, to have a position on leadership, and of course we do. We see it as being multidimensional. And for too long, I think, people have considered leadership to be somehow a magical collection of personality traits, you know, courage, vision, wisdom, bias for action, or whatever. And the idea of vision, you know, some sort of plan, some intention to shape the future. But of course, leadership is so much more than that. Management is so much more than that. Yes, you have to have a good character to be trusted, to behave with integrity. And indeed, if you don't have a view of the future, then how are you going to help shape it? But leadership is so much about delivering results, about helping yourself perform, helping other people perform, helping your colleagues achieve. And part of that is absolutely owning your role in events, in relationships, and in what you're trying to achieve. And that means brilliant to own our successes, isn't it? But it's also to absolutely take responsibility for our failures. And when you're leading teams, as you all are, and you've got people coming back into the workplace after a time out with different levels of anxiety, taking responsibility for those relationships, really important. And we also recognise how we need to be increasingly collaborative in how we work. And we can't rely on hierarchy to give us the status and the ability to give instructions that are going to be followed. So these are our 5 views, if you like, multidimensional view of leadership. And where we see coaching and ability to understand coaching approaches, to have a coaching conversation, is firmly within the dimension of achievement. Because coaching is, we've done research over the years, and I'll keep referring to the research that we've done, and increasingly young people are coming into the workforce and they don't want to be given targets and told feedback. They want to be coached, you know, they want to share that future, going back to vision. They want to help shape the future and their role in the organisation. So a manager who can use coaching approaches. Now, I will make that distinction. I'm not trying to tell everybody how to be a great coach today. I am saying, well, what can we learn from great coaching that's going to help us be great managers and leaders? Because at the Institute, we've been interested in coaching. Now, many of you have experience like me, you'll have been around a while, and really coaching in a business sense really took off in the 70s with Tim Galway and the inner game of tennis. And those of you who've read that book or heard about it, it was the first time, I think, that there was a proper recognition that so much goes on in the mind, in the head of the, in this case, of the athlete, of the performer. And technical ability is only part of the picture. And of course, that's absolutely the case at work, isn't it? People can be technically very knowledgeable, they can understand their part of the business, but if they don't have the right levels of confidence, interpersonal skills, emotional intelligence, they won't perform well. So organizations where you have a coaching culture are going to be more high performing than those that perhaps don't use such enlightened ways. And I use that quite deliberately. And another reason for our interest in coaching is, as a leadership development intervention, as leadership training, it's become more and more important. So we, in a way, you can either go on a traditional leadership training course or team leadership, first time manager course, or maybe you'd have a coach. So it gains a prominence that it never had, and it's increasingly, as you can see, that this is a few years ago, this research, so many people were using coaching or thinking, yes, we need to do that. So we published that research in 2011, and we carried on trying to work out what makes successful coaching, because anecdotally, and I'm sure everybody on the call has heard talk of, I had a coaching session with somebody and it was great and I was inspired and I feel better than I did before. What is it? What are those ingredients? And we worked so hard, and we asked a load of coaches what they thought, and then we told them again what they'd all thought, and then we came up with a way of evaluating coaching success. But it's very expensive, isn't it, gathering all that feedback, especially qualitative feedback that you have to analyse. So what we thought was, well, we are an institute for leaders, for managers, for people engaged in the daily complexity and untidiness, I think, of leading and managing. So we undertook some other research, Don't Tell Coach, where we were looking at how managers in the workplace are using coaching approaches, and that very much informed what I'll be talking about today. We have a journal that is published quarterly, and we are tremendously proud of it, full of very short articles, so it's quite an easy read. We did a coaching edition last summer, and it's been our most popular one ever. We've actually run out of copies, but it is freely available online on Issue, for example, from our website. So if you are really keen and inspired perhaps by what I'm talking about today, there's lots of great content in that edition of Edge. So what I want to do today is to think about how we might have a conversation. And I've said it's a step-by-step guide, but it's not a sequential, it's not a linear process, because coaching is relating. And how many of us have sort of practiced having a conversation with somebody in our head, and we imagine what they're going to say, and then they don't. And then we're left with our practice has been wasted because they didn't respond as we anticipated they might. And that, of course, is conversation. We cannot predict what somebody's going to say. If we know somebody well, we might have a good idea. But in a work scenario, we don't know. We cannot control the conversation to that extent. So I'm going to think about all the fundamentals, the principles of a coaching conversation. Because we found with our research, and this isn't just about coaching, that we asked managers whether they use coaching approaches. Did they listen more than they talked? Did they help people set targets? All the sorts of things you might expect from that enlightened sort of management I've been talking about. And we asked the managed. Now, these weren't matched pairs, so we weren't asking, your manager to talk about you. But what we found, as we often do, is a perception gap. People think they're doing more coaching than they actually are. And the experience of the people who think that they're being coached is different. Now, as I said, that is a really consistent finding, because perceptions rarely align perfectly like that, but it was particularly interesting. So we thought, yes, there's work to be done here to close that perception gap, to encourage managers to be more coaching in their style and to adopt more coaching approaches in the conversations that they have. Part of our work is with the Drucker organisation, and I was looking at this slide earlier thinking, well, in our world, Peter Drucker is like Usain Bolt or Owen Farrell. He's an absolute massive name, but I imagine, although I can't really believe it, in some parts of the world, people haven't heard of Usain Bolt. Certainly there would be people who haven't heard of Gareth Bale or Owen Farrell, but Peter Drucker was pronouncing on management, decades ago, and saying such wise things that I think perhaps had we heeded him more, many organisations would be in a much better state than they are currently. And I've extracted this quote from Peter Drucker because he's talking about something that I think we sometimes forget, is that actually you don't have to like people to trust them. You don't have to like people to be able to manage and lead them well. But what you do have to do is take responsibility for the relationship. So if you go back to what I was saying about ownership, actually, as a manager, you have to take huge amount of responsibility for the relationship that you have with the people that you manage. And it extends beyond that, doesn't it? It's our colleagues, it's everybody in our supply chain. So it's customers as well, it's all our stakeholders. We've all able to have a role in making that a better relationship. And one of the ways to do that, I'm advocating, of course, is that we use coaching approaches. Every year we produce a report that coincides with the Drucker Forum, where the great and the good. It's like it's the annual event for the great thinkers in leadership and management. They meet in Vienna, which is where Peter Drucker originally came from. And one of the people in that, in the report in 2018, was Professor of Leadership, Tammy Erickson. And what she does, and what I really like about Tammy, is that she makes predictions and she goes back and revisits them to see if she got them right. And that to me is really about taking responsibility, it's taking ownership of her own work. And she's made many predictions, but the one I've extracted for you today is about going forward. I know the gym world particularly have suffered so much recently from being closed, being one of the last allowed to open. And there will be huge amounts of insecurity, not only about risk of infection, but about whether you're going to keep your job. We found some research I was reading yesterday that people who have stayed where other people have been laid off, for example, are not feeling buoyant about it. We've all heard of survivor's guilt, that feeling that this isn't great. But nevertheless, we still, going forward, always will need great people to work with us, because especially in a people business like most of you are engaged with, great people make happy customers. And so what, as a leader, we want to do is attract those great people, enable them to contribute and succeed, and then they'll stay, won't they? Or they'll do a great thing and then they'll move on. But whatever they will do is that they will be a real asset while they're in our teams. And so how do we attract them, but how do we keep them? And I think that is a real question and a real challenge, especially at times when external environment is quite difficult. So I'm advocating that a coaching conversation using coaching approaches is going to be a brilliant way of helping attract, retain those talented people. It'd be a great way of talking to customers, to other stakeholders, because the great thing about a coaching conversation is you don't need to tell the person that you're having one with them. So you can meet somebody, and people like to talk, especially at networking events. You can use coaching questions, keep the conversation absolutely flowing. You're practicing. They don't know that. All they know is they've got a really interested person listening to them and asking them great questions. So a coaching conversation is more than a friendly chat. It's not an interview. It's not giving people instructions or directions. It's not a training intervention as such. It is something that has a real purpose, that you hope expect something will come out at the end of it that's an action, that things will be slightly different as a result of somebody or you spending time talking to that person, consciously trying to use coaching approaches. And a bit like learning to drive, often you start doing this deliberately and then it becomes second nature. You can almost do it without thinking. So any situation that you're presented with might well lend itself to a coaching conversation. So we've identified 5 facets, components, aspects of a coaching conversation. And honestly, every time I talk about coaching conversations, I don't think, oh, maybe I should have put them all in a different order. Where do we start? Because as I said a few minutes ago, in conversation, everything is happening at once. Conversations don't go in a neat linear fashion, do they? They go off in different directions. They come back again. You start talking about things you never anticipated that you're talking about. So this isn't, although I said it's a step-by-step guide, there are the 5 steps, but the order that they happen will obviously vary from situation to situation. The starting point that I have identified, and I think I've alluded to this already, is there must be some sort of purpose to why you're having the conversation. Some sort of thing, is this about a problem? Is somebody has a dilemma? Is somebody excited about something and they want to make sure they're super successful? What is the substance, the point, if you like, of the conversation? So it's not just a catch up about what they've been doing or where they're going to go. So at the moment, you might well have lots of opportunities with people say they have a reluctance to come back to work, or it won't even be presented as clearly as that often. It's for you, the person who's trying to, conduct the coaching conversation, to ask the questions that help you identify the purpose, what's really going on in this situation. What do they really want to talk about? Or how can I create an environment or a sense that they feel okay to carry on talking to me? Because there is no coaching conversation if there's nothing to talk about, if you like, or nobody wants something to change, to be slightly different as a result of this, a problem to solve. And that, of course, is often, again, is such the sort of thing that you get so much better at just by doing. If anything needs practicing, it is having a coaching conversation. So you might have identified an issue that somebody has. It's obviously troubling them in some way, and you want to find out more about it. And of course, it's the questions. I mean, often I think maybe I should start talking about questions first of all, because questions are absolutely key. They tell you more about the purpose. They'll tell you more about what's going on. They also enable you to ask more questions, because I haven't mentioned listening here, but to me that's absolutely implicit. If you cannot listen, or you're not listening, then you're so busy getting your next question ready, it won't be the right question, will it? So you're asking people all the time, well, tell me a bit more, or how are you feeling about that? Oh, that's great, you're feeling really confident. Or the other thing is to explore how many people just do really like to share a problem, and they actually might not really want a solution. But the purpose then of the conversation is to allow them that space to talk about the problem, and maybe even, depending on the level of the rapport, etc., that you have with them, saying, oh, do you want to solve this problem? No, how keen are you to get a solution to this? Or how optimistic are you that there is a solution to this? All sorts of ways of asking questions so you know more. And some of the best questions are things like, go on, or tell me a bit more about that. They don't have to be really clever, like Jeremy Paxman on Newsnight. When you're first trying to get better at questioning and get an understanding of the person you're talking to, it's often quite useful to say, For example, somebody says to you, oh, I've got this presentation to, senior management on Friday. I'm looking forward to it, but you can tell that there's a bit more to it than that. You might say, well, scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you you're going to smash it, or whatever, language you choose. And then that gives you some sort of sense of scale about maybe how daunting or not daunting the situation is. But questions are happening all the time because it's a conversation. That's the only way. Well, of course, it's not but it's the main way that you're going to get the information you need to be helpful, to be able to make the experience a really useful one. Now, a conversation needs a structure, and going back to what I was saying about this is it's a step-by-step guide, but there's not first do this, then do that. It's not like driving a car in as much as put it into gear, take your foot off the accelerator, the clutch, etc. It's actually about trying to remember to keep all the bits in the conversation, that you've covered all the things that need to be covered in order to be able to say, yeah, that was a coaching conversation. And so you need to know what's happening. Why are we talking about this? What's going on here? Some idea, as I said, that the intention to have something, an output, a result from the conversation, to remind people that actually we all have choices and options, because you can do something or do nothing, whatever that is. And often that feeling of having no choice or there being no options is so demotivating, it's discouraging, and it really is quite stressful and depressing. So always helping people to think you've got choices is it's quite it's an upbeat sort of thing to remind people about. But any coaching conversation that one could say, yeah, well done, coaching conversation taking place there, has to be some sort of idea that that something's going to happen next. There's going to be an action after it. And quite often, as I said, earlier, if you rehearse a conversation with somebody, they don't reply as you've anticipated, then your rehearsal's slightly wasted. We might formulate an action, and it might not work, or it might not be able to happen. So often when we're thinking about an action, it won't be a single action. There might well be a contingency plan. So what we recommend is that we use a model, some sort of way of thinking about a coaching conversation. Now, this one is called the GROW model. Now, anyone who's done any sort of introduction to coaching will probably have been introduced to this model. And no apologies for that, because I think anything that's widely used is telling us something. And if loads of people have heard of it, loads of people get it, then that's a powerful model. Now, it has its critics, of course, because it's a bit simplistic and it looks as though coaching, for those who are taking it perhaps too literally, it might look as though it's a linear step at a time. But nevertheless, it is helpful to remind you when you're starting out trying to do this, that you need a purpose, some sort of idea, ambition for having the conversation. You need to know what's going on for the individual to sort of being able to locate it with a degree of seriousness or whatever. And often it's that conversation that what's going on for you, how's it going, how are you finding being back at work, how are you finding leading a team, how are you finding the new person that started, all of those sorts of questions, they're reality, aren't they? That's what's going on, and the goal might emerge from those great questions you've asked about what's really going on. And it's only when you've sort of got a sense of what we're trying to achieve from this that you can then start exploring those options that I talked about. What can we do about this? And what is particularly important about coaching or having a coaching conversation is the options come from the person that you're talking to. You don't do, well, have you thought about this? Even if they ask you, it's best to resist, because the best options, alternatives, actions will be those that people have devised, that are created for themselves. So once you've identified those options or with them together by asking you great questions, then you can say, all right, well, what next? What are you going to do first? Or how long is that going to take? Something that reminds the person that it's not just a talk, talk, just a conversation. It relies on them to take action. And so the GROW model, great, no problem with recommending that, just as I say, to remind people that you've got to fit it all in. And there's this other model here, which was developed from GROW, which if you really embrace what I'm saying now and think, yeah, I want to get great at that, then Oscar's probably really useful. It's more or less the same as GROW, but with that extra reflection on you as a coach. How well did I do that? How, did I ask, were my questions good enough? Could I have asked better? Was I judging? Was I offering advice? Was I doing all the things that I know I shouldn't have been doing, but I couldn't resist in the moment? So it's to improve your practice as a coach. So as I say, any model, you could Google coaching models and you get lots of results. But to me, it's just remembering, that those the features, if you like, of GROW, even if it's not about trying to go through them one at a time. Rapport is talked about an awful lot in terms of when, especially like a formal coaching intervention. So when you book a coach and you book 6 sessions over a number of weeks, and what is usually very important is this idea of chemistry, that somehow you have to really like the person, like the coach. I think rapport will be there, but I'm a bit of obviously a fan of Peter Drucker. You don't have to be best mates or think that this person's fantastic. You can actually, not particularly like them. There wouldn't be somebody that you spend time with socially. But by showing that you're interested in them, you're invested in the relationship, you are absolutely to be trusted, that you won't repeat any of the conversation to anybody else, you are absolutely on their side in terms of the success that you want for them, I think the rapport will emerge from that. How many of you there, it's quite tricky, not being able to see you all, but when you've been in a team that's been successful, often you start liking your teammates. Whereas if you're in a team that isn't successful, it's much easier to not like them, because it's easier to start looking for reasons and blame. So I think if somebody's on your side, they're trying to do, work well, be with you in whatever it is you're trying to deliver, then that rapport will certainly come, because you get rather good at empathy. This idea, some coaches sort of say we shouldn't be, they resist empathy as a description. So that idea of pushing yourself in somebody else's shoes, trying to look at the problem from their perspective, that really helps with rapport, because you're not being yourself for a moment, are you? Because somebody might present, I was talking to somebody earlier who was trying to convince me that there was no real, going out at the moment, no riskier than the chance of having a heart attack. That isn't my worldview, but by trying to see the view of somebody who is looking at it from that point of view, you get a better understanding and a better insight. So whenever somebody presents you with a problem, whether to you it might be, why are they making such a fuss about this? Or this is huge. Are they not taking it seriously enough? That's you putting your values and your lens on the situation. And actually, again, sometimes these conversations take place, standing up in corridors and everyone says by the water cooler. But where you have a little bit more time and maybe a more private space, it's often useful, somebody, especially when they have a problem with somebody else, if you say, well, what will they say about you? If you have a problem with somebody's relationship, well, do you think they have a problem with you? Are you part of the problem? And that just, as I say, switching round, all of that contributes so well to this idea of rapport. And as you as a coach, of course, you get better and better at empathizing and understanding their view of the world that might not be yours, but that's not what's under review, is it? But anybody who listens to you, for most of us anyways, and it's just lovely. It's just so nice to have somebody genuinely interested in what you're saying. I think I've noticed, particularly the last few months, the old "how you are" or "how are you" actually has taken on a meaning that people genuinely listen to the answer. Because in pre-COVID, you just said yes, whether or not you were feeling fine or otherwise. It was almost like a hello. So being listened to, it's a great gift to give people you work with. And it doesn't always have to be the people, as I say, that report to you. It can be your colleagues. It can be anybody that you meet in the working day, or indeed outside work. But what you do need to do, because time is often limited, is to keep the conversation with a focus on the future. Because it's so easy to tell stories. Well, you see, 10 years ago, we used to do this and then that happened. And that's great. That's the reality. That's the context. But it can actually be a distraction and mean that you miss the point of the conversation. So keep asking people to imagine forward. So somebody's got a problem. Well, what would you do if you were successful? How would that feel? Who'd notice? Who'd be pleased for you? And that's an important question, because sometimes people forget how many people are on their side, how much resource they have, not only in their own experience and their own capability, but people that will help them if asked. And a brilliant question is to say, well, what a year from now, what's this problem going to be like? How might it be solved? And that again gives a perspective, because actually maybe a year from now, this is really not going to be very important at all, or maybe it's going to be even more important. Because if we get the decision, or we don't give this enough attention now, it might have longer lasting consequences. So to keep our eye on the future, which is so linked, isn't it, to the actions, this idea of what you're going to do, well, what next, what's going to happen as a result of this conversation, not as directively or as aggressively as that perhaps, but keeping an idea that something's got to change, we've got to do something, we are looking forward all the time. So those are the 5, as I say, components of a great coaching conversation. I hope that that's been helpful. As I say, it's a lot to try and do all at once, but you will get brilliant at it when you do it, if you keep practicing. And as I said, the great thing about coaching conversations is you can have one and the other person doesn't even know that that's what you're doing. So if you want to go onto our website, please do. We have free resources, but I have to put that in, as you'd imagine. They're very keen in our marketing department. But now I'd be really delighted if there are any questions.
Hi Kate, Chris here again. Thank you so much for a fantastic session. If you want to just stop sharing your screen, and then we can just get the 2 of us on screen. And if anybody, as Kate says, has any questions, please just pop them into the Q&A box down at the bottom of the page. Whilst we wait for any questions to come through to us, Kate, there's certainly a few questions that I've got on this topic. What would you say the difference is between coaching and mentoring? Because I think that comes up quite regularly.
Well, I have quite a firm views on mentoring, actually. I think often it's not really a mentoring session. It's an excuse for somebody just to talk to you or at you. But the approaches should be the same. This open-ended questioning, the fact that you can be trusted, that you listen, that you're on the side of the mentee or the coachee. You want their success. I think they're the similarities. But what we expect from a mentor is that they'll, share their experience. They'll give insights from the organisation or the industry. Their experience will be helpful for us. So coaching, non-directive, you don't give people the answers, but a mentor has much more freedom, I think, to advise and say, well, what I do or what I've learned.
Brilliant, thank you for that. What would you say about coaching qualifications? Is that something that people should be looking for so they can really become, I suppose, experts in the world of coaching? Is that important?
I think anything that shows that you've studied something, you've taken it seriously, and that it's been recognised by a third party is very CV building. And as I say, coaching is rising in popularity all the time. Coaching styles of management, coaching cultures, certainly in the fitness industry, it can only make you look better. And at the moment, there's some great online deals for coaching. But I mean, one of the ones that we offer is actually where you submit an audio of yourself coaching. Because what I think is quite ironic, writing about what a great coach you are is really not quite the same as actually doing it, is it?
No, 100% agree. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, from my experience, you mentioned there, we're obviously focusing around leaders and managers here, but the people that a lot of our leaders and managers are working with and that they are coaching are perhaps fitness professionals. And from my experience of working with clients, you're still having those coaching style conversations.
Yeah.
Things like the GROW model that you mentioned there is something that I've used and colleagues have used incredibly successfully in the past to help. What you often find is that the client almost knows where they need to go and what they need to do, but you're almost drawing that information out of them.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly valuable. And I think fitness professionals in particular, they begin the journey in a mold of, I'm just going to tell somebody what to do. But they never dig beneath the sort of layers of the onion and peel that back to find out what's really important to that person. And when you can do that through a coaching style conversation, that can really kind of enhance the relationship and lead to a lot more success. So I think that's relevant. We've got a couple of questions coming in. So Nick Windsor has asked, are there any books or authors that you would recommend to go and read to find out more on the topic of coaching?
Well, I can only refer you to the Institute of Leadership and Management's resources. Actually, I do really love those inner game books. And now they started with tennis and then it's gone to all sorts of things. So that's Tim Galway. Quite honestly, I think it was John Whitmore that developed the GROW model. There's so much good stuff online that if you go to Business Balls or you can go to our website, you can find the content quite easily, and it's usually quite good because coaches are very generous with what I'd say to anybody. Just actually keep doing it, practicing it, get your hours in, and then when you have a particular problem, then go and find the right intervention for that when you're doing your own reflection. But for me, being a bit, biased for action, go on, have a go, do it, and then think, I didn't do that very well, but I'll do it better next time.
Yeah, completely agree. I think self-reflection is so important. Yeah. So we've got lots of questions coming in now, which is brilliant. So Minesh, I think one of my former colleagues, actually, Minesh. So is it easy to be more of a manager than a coach or leader because of pressure that you get, or is it more learned behavior?
I do think organisations traditionally try to, and I think actually it goes back a lot to, we don't really unpack what we understand by leadership and management at a young age. And of course, as a child, we're so used to being told what to do and directed by parents, by head teachers, that our view, and then we go into organisations and we're very low and somebody is very high up. And so you get this idea that actually it's about telling people what to do. And then I think one of the things you find out throughout your career, your disappointment that people just do not do what you tell them. That doesn't happen. What people do is follow their own goals, their own agendas, and if that's a shared one with you. So I think it's actually, there's a young person I used to work with who got a job as a manager in a car hire firm, and she's very young, and she said, she looks back and she was dreadful, because she had this very curious idea in her head, and a shared one, and it wasn't her that was curious by any means, of what actual managers do. So what you really want to do, and if I was ever going to sort of encourage people to look at a leadership approach, I'd say have a look at servant leadership. Don't follow it dogmatically, but start thinking about what can I do to help the people who work for me be the best they can be. That's my job, to make them look good. It's not their job to make me look good. And that actually then transforms the way you view the relationship. And you can actually say to somebody, I could say, please tell me, how do I make you look, what can I do to make you the best you can be? And that is a nice question, especially at the moment when people have been working at home and working in different days. How can I help you do that really well?
Brilliant. I love that. The good news is that Nick, who asked about the books and resources, is actually an ILM member. So
Oh, well done, Nick.
he's
Yes.
off to look at the inner game, which is brilliant. Abby's asked a question. Abby Carter has asked, is everybody coachable? And what do you do when you get little back from questioning and have very little to work with?
Oh, well, I love that question. And I think I was trying to allude to that tactfully when I said some people do not want solutions to their problems. They just like to talk about their problems. We talk quite a lot in the coaching world about coaching readiness. And of course, there are some people who will not easily embrace. Well, they might have that old view of manager. Well, I'm not telling you, you tell me what to do. That's what you get paid for. I am here waiting to follow your instructions. And I think that's a passive aggression about that. So yes, Abby, there are people who will resist it. But then again, it's about having the courage, I suppose, to be able to have that quite difficult thing, saying, well, you're not enjoying this experience, or it's not working for you. How would you like me to be? What can I do to help you? And again, with the monosyllabic responses, we had a webinar a couple of weeks ago on the introverted manager. Some people aren't great in the moment. How often have we all thought, I wish I'd said that, when you think about later. So it's adapting your style to try and suit them, say, oh, we're going to have a conversation later. I thought we could talk about this, giving them some notice and some time.
Brilliant. Thank you. Great advice. I'm going to pop a question in here. So over the recent months, there's been a huge kind of focus and a spotlight on diversity. And I think that will become even more commonplace as we head back into the workplace. What advice would you give to our sector's leaders on ensuring that they are coaching in a sort of and leading in an unbiased and more inclusive way?
Well, certainly with regard to taking a coaching approach, as I tried to emphasise, that you don't judge. Now, that is very, very difficult. But if you're trying to look at somebody, how they see the world, and ask them their worldview, then that empathy will be a very different approach, and a sort of give you an insight and an understanding that you would not get if you don't start from that position. What does the world look like for you? Tell me about what that's like for you. What is it like to work here? How inclusive do you think we are? Do you think there's enough diversity? So those very open-ended questions, but the hard thing to hold on to, but actually the crucial thing, is the judging. You don't try and say, oh, well, start making excuses, or, oh, well, we really are very inclusive. If somebody experiences it as not inclusive, you have to accept that as a coach in that context. So it's finding out, listening to the answers, and not trying to fix the problem in that conversation, but use it to raise your own awareness and your own consciousness about what the world looks like.
Brilliant, thank you for that. We've got one more question. This is a great one. So how do you persuade your own manager to adapt a coaching style of management?
The best way to that, I think, is to give the responsibility to a third party. So you show them an article, like you get something out of Edge magazine or one of the resources that we've got, and you say, oh, this is really interesting. I think it seems that really successful managers do it like this, and that can be quite a prompt. For those people who actually resist reading things, and I have met people like that, a great thing to do is to assume that they know. And you say things like, well, Chris, you know how important, you know that a coaching style delivers better results. And they say, yes, they do. And that changes the dynamic slightly, because then they have to start, get cognitive dissonance kicking in. And we think, oh, well, maybe I do think that, and therefore I'm going to have to find out a little bit more about it. But, some people from the old command and control school of thought, I think that the only challenge there is, citing research and evidence that says, like the Tammy Erickson You get great people if you coach them, and they'll leave if you don't. In the end.
Yep. I think that's a good way to end things.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kate, for that. I think we've covered all the questions, but if anybody does have any further questions, you can contact us, and I'm sure Kate wouldn't mind having further conversations on the topic. So, Kate, thank you so much. I think this has been a fantastic session, and I'm sure people have taken a lot away from it to implement as they head back into the workplace in the coming days if they're not already there. So.
Oh, great! Thank you for inviting me.